Okay, so you know how much we love getting into the nitty-gritty here on the deep dive. And you guys, you send in some super interesting stuff. And one that really caught our eye is Sam Carpenter's Work the System.
Yeah, and for our listeners who are, all about efficiency, about really cutting to the chase, this deep dive is going to be pure gold. We're going to pull out the most powerful ideas from that book and give you a framework, a shortcut, if you will, to apply these principles in your own lives. Less effort, better results. Who doesn't want that?
Exactly. And, if at first glance, Work the System, it kind of seems like, okay, it's about these three main steps, right? Like
Mm,
you document how things are actually working, you get in there, identify the problems, and fix them. And then, of course, it's about making sure those improvements stick, keeping those systems humming along smoothly. But then Carpenter adds this whole layer about control. Like, how much control do we really have over these different systems? Is it, complete control, some control, no control? It adds this whole extra dimension.
right. It's not just about blindly fixing things. It's about understanding the nature of those systems and whether we can actually influence them or not. That's a huge part of his framework.
And this is where things get really interesting, almost counterintuitive. Carpenter makes this point that aiming for, like, absolute perfection, that 100% mark, it can actually be a trap. He says hitting that sweet spot, around 98% accuracy, that's often the most effective, most efficient approach.
Yeah.
That's something we definitely need to unpack because it goes against, like, a lot of our natural instincts, right?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating concept, and it's central to his whole philosophy. But before we get too deep into that, let's start with the basics. What exactly does Carpenter mean when he says system? How does he define it?
He's very specific about this. He says a system is a group of interacting, interrelated, or interdependent elements forming a complex whole. So it's not just, one thing in isolation. It's this collection of moving parts. And they all influence each other in ways that, we don't always see.
Right. And as you said, those systems are often operating behind the scenes. We don't even realize they're there until something goes wrong or until we really start to pay attention. But Carpenter's central argument, the real gem here, is that if you're not happy with the results you're getting in your business, your personal life, wherever, it's not enough to just, try harder to change those outcomes directly. You have to go deeper, look at the underlying systems that are producing those results in the first place. And he says that's where the real power lies in working the systems.
So it's like that saying, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. But Carpenter's saying, hey, let's look at the whole fishing industry, the tools, the techniques, the regulations. That's the system that ultimately determines how many fish you're going to catch.
Exactly. And he makes this point really vividly, talking about how these systems are like invisible threads holding the fabric of our lives together. It's such a powerful image. So if you're constantly late for appointments, Carpenter wouldn't just say, okay, set more alarms. He'd say, let's analyze your entire morning routine. That's the system that's creating those late arrivals.
So, okay, that's the why behind work the system. But how do we actually do it? This is where his three-step method comes in.
Precisely. And that first step, it's all about documentation. He's adamant about this. You can't fix what you don't understand. And to truly understand your systems, you've got to write down exactly how they're operating right now in detail. He calls this making the implicit explicit. And to do that, he outlines three main types of documents: the strategic objective, the general operating principles, and then the working procedures.
Okay, let's break those down for a second because I think they might sound a bit intimidating at first. So the strategic objective, this is basically your big picture goal, the ultimate destination you're aiming for, right? It's a one-page document, short and sweet, but it gives you that clear direction, that sense of purpose for everything you do, both professionally and personally.
Exactly. Carpenter even calls it your Declaration of Independence. It's your vision, your personal mission statement for what you want to achieve in life. So, for someone who's feeling lost, maybe a bit directionless in their career, just taking the time to sit down and create that one-page strategic objective, it can be incredibly clarifying and empowering. Imagine that, a single page that can help you navigate all the different paths you could take.
It's like having that compass, right? When you're facing a tough decision, you can just pull out that strategic objective and ask yourself, does this choice, this opportunity, align with my ultimate goals? Is it moving me in the direction I want to go?
Yeah.
Without it, it's easy to get sidetracked, to make choices that might seem good in the moment but don't actually serve your long-term vision.
Exactly. It brings that intentionality to every decision. It's incredibly valuable. Then you have the general operating principles, which are a bit more detailed, maybe 2 or 3 pages long. These are your guiding rules, your constitution, the framework for making decisions that are in line with your strategic objective. And Carpenter suggests dedicating a good chunk of time to crafting this, maybe 10 or 20 hours over a couple of months. I know that might seem like a big investment, but it's about building that solid foundation, that unshakable core for all of your systems.
It's about doing the deep thinking up front so you don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel later on.
Precisely. And then finally, we get to the working procedures. These are the nuts and bolts, the step-by-step instructions for how tasks actually get done. Carpenter emphasizes that the vast majority of these, like 95%, should be in that super simple 1, 2, 3 format. It's all about clarity, making them easy to understand, easy to follow, no room for ambiguity. And the remaining 5% can be in a more narrative form for those really complex processes that don't quite fit into a rigid step-by-step structure.
So it's about creating a system for your systems, right?
Right.
Having that consistency across the board makes everything run smoother.
Absolutely. It reduces errors, improves consistency, just makes everything more efficient. And as Carpenter puts it, it's about setting those processes in concrete, making them solid and reliable.
Okay, so we've spent all this time documenting, creating this amazing blueprint of our systems. What's the next phase? How do we actually start making things better?
This is where step 2 comes in. Separation, dissection, and repair. Now that you have everything laid out, you can really start to analyze those systems, particularly the ones that are causing problems, not delivering the results you want. And you break them down into their individual components, like a surgeon performing an operation, to identify those bottlenecks, those points of friction, those inefficiencies that are holding you back. He calls it isolate, fix, maintain. It's about pinpointing that specific problematic part, fixing that one issue, and then making sure that improved component is maintained going forward. So no more Band-Aid solutions. It's about targeted, precise interventions.
So instead of just looking at the overall symptom, we're going in and finding the root cause. And what's fascinating is that Carpenter really emphasizes that a lot of the recurring problems we face, they're not because of some external force, some unavoidable circumstance. They actually come from our own flawed personal systems. And guess what? We have the power to change those systems.
That's a really powerful realization. We often have this tendency to blame things outside of ourselves when things go wrong. But Carpenter turns that thinking on its head and says, hey, look in the mirror. A lot of this is on you. He literally says, we don't recognize that recurring personal pain is not often the result of a flawed world, but more usually the result of our own flawed personal systems we can repair. And when you really grasp that, it can be incredibly empowering. You realize that you have far more control over your life than you might have thought.
It's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not just a victim of circumstance here. I can actually do something about this. And that brings us to the third crucial step in his methodology. Ongoing maintenance. It's not a one-time fix, right?
Nope, not at all. This is where a lot of people go wrong. They fix something, they celebrate, they pat themselves on the back, and then they move on. But Carpenter is very clear. Improving your systems, it's a continuous journey. It's about regularly reviewing those documented systems, looking for opportunities to tweak them, to refine them, to make them even more effective. He actually uses this really cool analogy. Imagine a system that improves with time rather than wears out. And that's what ongoing maintenance is all about. It's a process of constant iteration, always looking for ways to make things just a little bit better.
So it's like, getting your car serviced regularly or even just keeping your house tidy. It's the small, consistent actions that prevent those bigger problems from cropping up.
Precisely. And that brings us back to that surprising concept we touched on earlier, the 98% rule. Why does Carpenter say that striving for that last 2% of perfection might not be the best use of our time and energy? It seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, it does, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with messages about, hustling harder, achieving more, never settling. So what's the logic behind this?
It boils down to the principle of diminishing returns. Carpenter argues that going from, say, 98% accuracy or efficiency to a full 100%, the amount of effort and resources required, it just skyrockets. It becomes disproportionate to the actual benefit you get. That last little bit of improvement, it often demands way too much energy that could be much better spent elsewhere, like improving other systems, tackling other challenges. And he even calls it, a bit of a catch-22. We get so fixated on that idea of perfection, that 100%, that we end up wasting a ton of time and resources on something that ultimately doesn't make a significant difference.
So it's about being strategic and recognizing that in most cases, getting things right most of the time is actually the smartest, most effective approach. It's about knowing when good enough is actually good enough. And he talks about this thing called the exponential curve of excellence, suggesting that at a certain point, the extra effort you put in yields very little in terms of real, tangible improvement. But, I do have to wonder, are there situations where settling for that 98% could be detrimental? Like, what about in areas where safety is paramount? Or in customer service, where even a small error rate could have big consequences?
You raise a really important point, and Carpenter is not saying that we should be careless or compromise on essential requirements, especially where precision is absolutely critical. His 98% rule, it's more about recognizing when that pursuit of perfection becomes an obsession, when it starts to drain resources without providing any real added value. So yeah, in safety critical industries, for example, the system itself would need to incorporate things like rigorous error checking, redundancies, all those measures to aim for as close to 100% as practically possible. But for a lot of our day-to-day processes, whether it's at work or in our personal lives, that relentless pursuit of perfection, it can lead to procrastination, to wasted effort, to missed opportunities. It's about finding that balance, understanding the context, and knowing where to draw the line.
So it's not about lowering your standards. It's about being smart about where you focus your energy.
Exactly. Now, another really fascinating aspect of Carpenter's thinking that I wanted to touch on is this connection he draws between control and our overall sense of happiness. He cites research by Charles Duhigg, who found that that feeling of having control over our lives, it's a huge contributor to our well-being.
It makes total sense. Like, when you feel like you're just constantly reacting to things, like you're at the mercy of external forces, it's stressful.
Yeah.
But when you feel like you're in the driver's seat, even if it's just in certain areas of your life, it's calming, it's empowering. And this is where Carpenter ties it back to our systems.
Right. He says it's not about trying to control everything and everyone around us, but about taking ownership of and actively managing the things that we can control. And those are our own personal systems. He talks about consciously designing and maintaining our own systems as a way of, and I love this phrasing, taking control of the moment-to-moment trajectory of our own lives.
It's like that classic Stoic philosophy, isn't it? Focus on what you can control, accept what you can't. And improving our own systems, that falls squarely in the can control category.
Exactly. And Carpenter even references William B. Irvine's work on Stoicism, which is really cool to see that connection. And this leads to another really interesting observation he makes, and that is systems, by their very nature, they tend towards order, towards efficiency. He says there's no inherent, cosmic inclination for chaos. So by consciously engaging with these systems, by bringing that structure, that orderliness, that attention to detail, we can actually cultivate a greater sense of peace and calm in our lives.
Like, okay, yeah, the world might be inherently chaotic, but my little corner of it, my systems, they can be a haven of order and predictability.
Exactly. It's about creating those pockets of control in a world that often feels very much out of control. And Carpenter really emphasizes this idea of shifting your perspective. He says instead of getting bogged down in that day-to-day chaos, instead of just reacting to problems as they pop up, take a step back and analyze the larger system at play. He contrasts successful businesses that are proactively managing their systems with those that are constantly just struggling to put out fires.
So it's like the difference between, you know, having a well-maintained fire prevention system in your house versus just running around with a fire extinguisher hoping you can put out the flames before they spread.
Exactly. And he calls that reactive approach fire killing. He says most of the time, the problems we face, they're not the result of some massive catastrophic failure. They're what he calls errors of omission. It's simply the lack of having the right systems in place to prevent those problems from happening in the first place.
It's like we didn't do anything wrong per se. We just didn't have a system to ensure that things were done right. And this is where action comes in. Carpenter is adamant about this. He says, knowing what needs to be done isn't enough. You have to actually implement those systems, put them into practice, solidify them through documentation, and communicate them clearly to everyone involved.
Right. It's about turning that knowledge, those insights, into concrete action, into tangible processes. And one thing he touches on that I think is so relevant for a lot of people is the role of time management. He says that this entire work the system methodology, it's ultimately about freeing up more of our time. It's about creating that space for higher level thinking, for better preparation, for the things that really matter.
Because when you have efficient systems in place,
Yeah.
you're not constantly putting out fires. You're not scrambling to catch up. You have that bandwidth to actually think strategically, to be proactive. And he identifies this reluctance to invest that initial time, that upfront work of system building, as a major obstacle for a lot of people.
It is, because it feels like, oh, I don't have time for that right now. I've got to get all this other stuff done. But that's the classic trap, isn't it? It's like the saying, I'm too busy chopping wood to sharpen the axe.
And Carpenter even quotes Henry Ford on this. He says, the secret to getting ahead is to get started while others are wasting time. He argues that strategically using your most focused, your most alert periods for those crucial system building tasks, that can lead to some really significant long-term gains.
It's about being intentional with your time, your energy, focusing on the activities that are going to have the biggest impact on your overall effectiveness. So to really bring it all together, what's the core message of work the system? It's to stop solely focusing on the outcomes you desire and instead shift your attention to the underlying mechanisms, those often invisible systems that are actually driving those results.
Right, exactly. Focus on the process, not just the product. And as Carpenter so elegantly puts it, focus on the mechanical systems that produce the results, not the other way around. It's about building a robust and well-maintained collection of efficient subsystems, and then the overall system, whether that's your business, your personal life, whatever, it just naturally operates more effectively, more reliably. It's almost like magic, but it's not. It's just good systems.
And it's not about looking for that quick fix, that magic bullet. Carpenter encourages us to, as he says, strip away the complexity, to get down to those fundamental processes that are driving our results, and then to just start working on those mechanisms one thoughtful step at a time.
So for you, our listener, here are the key takeaways from this deep dive into Sam Carpenter's Work the System. First, recognize the incredible power of making small, incremental improvements to the systems in your life. You don't have to overhaul everything at once. Just start small, be consistent, and watch those small changes compound over time. Second, understand the importance of focusing your energy on the systems that you can actually control. Don't waste time and energy stressing about things you can't change. And finally, embrace the idea that good enough is often good enough. Aim for that 98% mark and don't get bogged down in the pursuit of absolute perfection.
Those are such powerful insights. And as you said, it's not about lowering your standards. It's about being strategic, about knowing where to focus your energy for maximum impact. And I love that Carpenter emphasizes that this is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly learning, adapting, improving.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Think about one recurring challenge you're facing right now. Take a step back and try to objectively identify the underlying system that's contributing to that challenge. And then ask yourself, what's one small, specific component of that system that you could isolate and start to fix or improve right now? It can be something as simple as changing the way you organize your to-do list, or creating a more efficient system for processing emails, or even just tweaking your morning routine to give yourself a more calm and focused start to your day. Start looking at your world through the lens of interconnected systems and see what new possibilities for positive change begin to emerge.
It's about becoming a systems thinker. And the beauty of it is, once you start seeing the world this way, you can apply these principles to virtually any area of your life. It's a truly empowering way to live.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.
See you then.